Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.
We hope you enjoy listening to this podcast of St. Louis on the Air, brought to you by University College at Washington University, with undergraduate and graduate programs part-time, evening, and online. University College at Washington University, offering world-class education within reach.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. We'll learn a little later this month who has been elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame for 2019. It ends a long selection process, a process that usually inspires considerable debate. Fans discuss the worthiness of those who were and were not nominated. Often the debate centers on whether players suspected of using performance-enhancing drugs or PEDs should enter the hall. The discussion is one thing for fans, quite another for baseball writers who cast ballots. Derrick Goold of the Post-Dispatch is one of them, and he joins me in studio. Derrick, great to have you with us.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Here we are talking baseball on what promises to be a snowy day.
Yeah, typical St. Louis conversation, right?
Really
Baseball
is.
Never stops here.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the process for the Hall of Fame. In a couple of days, a week or a little bit more, they'll be announcing who made the Hall. What is that process like?
So there's a ballot that goes out. There are many avenues into Cooperstown and the National Baseball Hall of Fame for players. The one that I'm involved in is the ballot process, which is sort of the first, I guess, hurdle for players. And to have a ballot, you have to be a member in good standing of the Baseball Writers Association of America for 10 years. It takes 10 years of being on the beat and working the beat to then earn a ballot. Then you vote. You get that ballot early on in December. Players who are on the ballot have been retired for 5 years.
How did they get there? How did they get on the ballot?
Yeah, they've been retired for 5 years. They have a minimum of 10 years in the majors, and then there's a screening committee. That committee has a lot of elasticity to its standards. So, like, you will have guys on there that people will go, well, why is that guy on the Hall of Fame ballot? Well, he meets the minimum standard requirements, and the committee puts him on there. That doesn't mean that he's going to get votes. Lots of players get on the ballot and don't get any votes, and they move off the ballot. The ballot comes out in early December, and you have 10 spots on your ballot. It's not an unlimited ballot. It's 10 spots. So the Hall is basically asking you to vote for the most worthy members of this ballot. And if you have 8, you vote for 8. If you have 10, you vote for 10. If you think there are 14 players deserving, you vote for the 10 most worthy. They're due by the new year, and a player needs 75% of the vote to get induction into the Hall of Fame. They can be on the ballot now for 10 years as long as they meet the minimum requirement of 5% every year.
Okay, so we're down to the point now where I guess the players who have made it have already been selected, or is that or been not named but selected?
Well, yeah, I would imagine they're being counted right now. Yeah, the ballots have to be post-dated by December 31st, so the ballots are from all the eligible voters. About 400 plus voters are arriving, and they'll be counted up and tabulated. They're probably in that process right now.
What do you think of this process?
I think it has some flaws. I understand some of them. I think overall it's hard to find where it's gone wrong. There is a safety net of sorts because the Hall does have what it calls veteran committees, and that's what elected Lee Smith here recently and Harold Baines here recently was a veterans committee. So players who do slip through the writers vote and don't get inducted still have a chance at being inducted later, and that's like the hope for Ted Simmons, that eventually one of these veteran committees will stir and pay attention to his statistics and put him in the Hall of Fame. I think one of the things that we've seen is, and this is a byproduct of the steroid era, is that there have been a glut of candidates, and that's really bunched up the ballot in such a way that you could look at it. This ballot is arguably the strongest ballot ever. You could, depending on your view of certain statistics or certain careers, you could probably reasonably vote for 15 or 16 different players on this ballot and be within your right. Because it's limited to 10, I personally have written about this, and I've gone to the Hall and spoken to the Hall about this, is I think they're asking us the wrong question. They should be asking us a question of, is this a Hall of Fame player, yes or no? And instead what they're asking us is, who are the 10 most worthy players on this ballot? And therefore you have to find some way to trim the ballot down. And I think that's a false question. I worry about where it's led us.
Are there specific criteria for determining who's worthy?
There are. No, other than the minimum requirements, but there are guidelines, right? Okay, and everybody has a different way of looking at this. I wanted to call this up before coming to talk to you, and the one that gets everybody's attention is number 5 on the methods of election, and that's called the sportsmanship clause. And here's how it reads. It says, voting shall be based upon the player's record, playing ability, integrity, sportsmanship, character, and contributions to the team or teams on which the player played. That's the one that gets a lot of attention because it's different than other Hall of Fame votes, than the Football Hall of Fame, than the Basketball Hall of Fame, than almost any other sports Hall of Fame. That one stands out. Baseball has specifically said for us to consider sportsmanship and character, integrity, as part of our votes. How voters use that clause there that we're given is different. Some use it as a hard and fast rule to not vote for anybody suspected of using performance-enhancing drugs. Some don't use it at all and say, some of my really good friends write and say when we talk about this personally, that they're not the morality police. They're baseball writers. They're not there to judge based on what a player did or did not do. They're there to judge on the playing career. I think that my personal use of that clause is as a tool. I have to get a ballot that I think is 13, 14 people strong down to 10. So that is my hammer and chisel to knock off a few names. I can use the character and the integrity clause there, that sportsmanship clause, to whittle away my list down to 10.
Have these criteria been in effect since the whole thing started?
Pretty much, yeah. Since the 30s when the baseball writers started being involved in this.
Who's behind that?
The Hall. The Hall sets the standards. The Hall governs who does the voting and how the voting is done. Some inside baseball here is that a group of baseball writers several years ago went to the Hall and proposed expanding the ballot to 12. Just give us 12 names. Look, there are more players than ever for us to consider. There are a lot of worthy candidates. There's been a backlog because of the steroid era. We need more space to breathe. There's also 30 teams now, and when the 10-person ballot started, there were not 30 teams. So let's have some expansion. The Hall, tabled that suggestion. The Hall controls it. A few years ago when I was president of the Writers Association, we voted unanimously to make all of our ballots public. We felt that transparency was important. We request transparency in our jobs, so we figured we should offer it. We also wanted to open up the discussion, but also educate people on how the voting is done. We felt that transparency was a big part of that. The Hall, we had to come to a compromise because the Hall didn't want to release all of the ballots. So now the ballot appears with a little box, and every voter can check, yes, I want my ballot public, or no. And a vast majority now, reflective of the body at whole, makes their ballot public, which is a big thing, I think.
Which you have done. I mean,
every year.
You've been very open about that.
Yeah, it would be hard for me to advocate that and not do it.
You talk about a backlog as a result of the steroid era. What exactly do you mean by that?
So, first of all, there was just a tremendous amount of statistics being put up, right? Okay, you think back to 1998, and some of the numbers that used to mean automatic election, like almost like given.
300 hitters,
right,
that sort of thing.
3,000 hits, 500 home runs. All these numbers were just now wacky. We saw, video game numbers going up. You think back to 98 with McGuire, Sosa going after it, and then, of course, all the power that followed until testing came into the game. And so you had, how do you wrestle with these, inflated numbers, these swollen players, and just the era in which they existed. You had Bonds, who was, Bonds 7-time MVP, Roger Clemens 7-time Cy Young winner, and they weren't getting the 75%. Like, those are first ballot Hall of Famers, except for they have the cloud over them, right? So they weren't getting the 75 to leave the ballot and enter the Hall, but they also weren't getting less than 5 to drop off the ballot. So there they've been for the entirety of those, they may be there for the entirety of the 10 years. Well, there's 2 spots that are taking up, votes from other people. If they had graduated off into the Hall, or the Hall had told us, well, we cannot vote on them because of, whatever the PEDs, then they would be off the ballot and we can move on. But there's this bunch, this cluster of players that get support, but not quite enough to graduate off the ballot.
Are you in favor of Bonds and Clemens being admitted to the Hall?
I have not voted for them yet. I want to say that yet is important. My approach to the 2 of them and others, there are other players on the ballot too that have been connected to PEDs. My approach with them has been that if I have 10 names and they are 2 of them, then I will vote for them because it's a full ballot. Or if the Hall puts their transgressions on the plaque, then I will vote for them. If the Hall puts their transgressions on the plaque, I think that is true to the message of the Hall, which is a museum as well as a Hall of Fame. So it's there to capture the history of the game and there to teach us a lesson of what shouldn't happen again, which baseball does really well. We can look back through baseball history and go, yeah, let's not let that stuff happen again. So if they put their transgressions on the plaque, I would be more inclined to vote for them. I would also hope that would lead to Pete Rose and Joe Jackson being involved or being inducted in the Hall. So those are my 2 spots. This year, I came pretty close. This year I had about 12 names, and I had to decide between whether the final 2 spots on my ballot would go Bonds Clemens or would go Helton McGriff. And I went Helton McGriff.
In terms of Bonds and Clemens, has it been definitively proved that they used steroids? I mean, everybody says they know that they did, but do we really know?
So it's a good question. There is a preponderance of evidence and a tremendous amount of reporting that has gone into them. Both of them have fought to a certain extent. Bonds less so than Clemens. Clemens has been very forthright. The evidence has stacked against Clemens considerably, including testimony and other reporting. I have approached this because I'm not naive enough to think that there isn't already someone who used PEDs in the Hall of Fame. I'm not blind to this.
Sure.
But I think of the ballot as if it's an article, and my signature as if it's a byline. And if I can write in the paper with attribution that a player used PEDs or a preponderance of evidence supports that he used PEDs, then I feel I can vote that way as well. I cannot write rumor, innuendo, and suspicion in the paper. I can't. I have to have attribution. And if I haven't reported or peers haven't reported, to the extent that you can safely say that this person has been linked to and used PEDs, then I don't think I can vote that way. Other people have different approaches. There are some folks who vote on don't vote on suspicion.
We keep talking about Bonds and Clemens. Are there others out there who are at various places on the ballot who have the same stigma?
Oh, sure. I mean, it all depends on your varying degree. I mean, here locally, you had Mark McGwire who admitted use. He was on the ballot and never generated enough support, and now if he ever comes up again, it'll be in the Veterans Committee. So you had McGwire, you have Sosa, obviously. Gary Sheffield was linked to, PEDs through Bonds. The Mitchell report mentioned some players who were, connected to PEDs. You had, some inference with Pudge Rodriguez, who has been inducted and fought the allegations that he gave. Or the allegations against him. So, you have different pockets all over now, and that's the product of the era that we're in. These are the players who played in the heart, the ones on the ballot right now who retired 5 years or more ago. These are the players who are, were right there in the heart of the era before there was testing. So it was the wild, wild west in a lot of ways.
You mentioned Pete Rose and shoeless Joe Jackson. Their only route, as would be the case for McGuire, would be through the Veterans Committee? Then?
No, their only route would be for Major League Baseball to drop their ineligibility, and then they could be considered. Both of them are on the ineligible list, so they've never appeared on a ballot.
The Pete Rose story is, I think, pretty well known. It was a gambling thing that he was involved in. But you mentioned, putting the asterisk in or putting something on the plaque.
Yeah.
That certainly was mentioned a lot with Pete Rose. My God, how can a guy like that, with his numbers, not be in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, exactly. And a plaque would be a testament to what went wrong. I've talked to folks with the Hall and other sports writers about this notion, and they dismiss it because they suggest, well, why would Barry Bonds show up to hold a plaque that says, what his transgressions were? And it's like, oh, that's fine. This is a museum as well. This is a place where 20 years from now, 40 years from now, 100 years from now, our great grandkids will go and they will learn something about baseball. And that means warts and all. The color barrier was broken, many decades too late, but we know that because baseball tells us it was a mistake, and it celebrates the hero Jackie Robinson, and Branch Rickey here, a guy who has a rich history with St. Louis. They celebrate the people who changed that, but they also acknowledge that it was way too late. And then we know that because the Hall tells us.
Have you ever talked to Bonds or Clemens about this?
About the Hall of Fame?
Yeah.
I have. That's a good question. I have not. I have spoken to them in the course of reporting. Obviously,
Sure.
Roger Clemens pitched against the Cardinals quite a bit there at the height of the Astros-Cardinals rivalry. So spoke to him then. I have attempted to talk to Bonds about the cloud over him or his thing, but he's very good at parrying and thrusting and ignoring.
He can be difficult, I am told.
Yeah, he's one of my great regrets as a sports writer, because I was a young sports writer covering baseball, doing sidebar detail for the Rocky Mountain News in Denver, and I was assigned to do a Bonds sidebar that day, and I went down and I attempted to talk to Bonds. He proceeded to spend about 5, 6, 7 minutes telling me why he wouldn't talk to me, which I thought was very curious, because he then had already talked to me and had spent more time explaining why he wouldn't than the interview would have taken. And so I recorded it because he didn't say it was off the record. And at the end of his spiel, I said, "Thanks for your time." And I was like, all right, I'll go write this. He just commented, so we're fine. But my biggest regret was the president was there at the ballpark that day, and it would have been tremendous to go and get a comment from the president about Bonds and have a no comment from Barry Bonds. And I missed that chance. That's a great regret of my career.
Well, and you won't have that chance again.
No, I won't have that chance again.
We have a caller. Dennis is going to join us. He has a question for you or a comment. Let's bring him into the conversation. Dennis, go ahead. You're on the air.
Yeah, well, my name's Dennis Clancy, and I used to see Rick when I was working at the Post, and but at any rate, my suggestion is Elston Howard, and I know I've actually, I think, talked to you about it before. I just feel like he was the first, African American, and then basically he did everything that the New York Yankees needed, and then invented the donut, and I think he was the guy that came up with the hook 'em horns for how many outs there are for the outfielders. He just did everything they needed.
Dennis, thank you for the call. What is it about catchers? We talk about Ted Simmons and Elston Howard.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in some ways, and third base too is also stuck in that. It's just an underrepresented position. I think baseball as a whole has a hard time capturing what a catcher brings to the ball field. And also what does hurt some, and I'm not quite sure if it would hurt Elston Howard, though I could see how it would. But what it does definitely hurt Ted Simmons and did Tim Raines for a long time and did Alan Trammell for a long time is this notion of being the second best at your position when you're playing at the same time as one of the best ever. So Tim Raines, really good leadoff hitter, Unfortunately, his contemporary was Rickey Henderson, who was arguably one of the best baseball players of all time. Sure. Same with Ted Simmons. He was in the league at the time of Johnny Bench. Johnny Bench is widely considered the greatest to ever play the position. So Ted Simmons always compared to that. I think we're going to have a reckoning with catcher coming up here in the next few years, and it's going to be Yadier Molina that leads it. He's got a Hall of Fame career. He's not going to have the counting numbers of a Bench, but he's going to have the reputation of shaping and molding and dictating and influencing games that is going to catapult him to Cooperstown and really lead to a renaissance of understanding about catchers.
How would you compare him to Ted Simmons?
Yadier? Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't see Ted Simmons play, so I'm going off of my colleague Rick Hummel and actually talking to Ted Simmons and everything like that. Ted Simmons was a tremendous offensive catcher who handled the position well. Yadier Molina is the best defensive catcher of his generation and widely regarded, whether it's from pitchers, like Joey Votto, the first baseman for the Cincinnati Reds, one of the best hitters of his generation, told me, he said when he goes up to bat against the Cardinals, he doesn't feel like it's him against the pitcher. He always feels like it's him against Yadier.
Interesting. Because
of how Molina calls the game, because of how Molina reads hitters. Shelby Miller, who recently signed with the Texas Rangers but was a young pitcher with the Cardinals for a long time, he told Bernie Miklasz, and it's one of those, I heard him say it, and it's like, I wish I would have gotten that quote. But he told Bernie Miklasz, he goes, I think Yadier Molina can see into the soul of the hitter. And that's something that he has a great reputation. Sandy Alomar Jr. told me that the Yadier Molina has changed how young catchers will play the position for the next generation because of his style.
I'm going to bring in one more caller, but it'll have to be quick. Mark in Potosi, please make a quick question or comment, please.
Yes. I just want to say that I really think that the question about whether there anybody that has been pretty well tied into performance-enhancing drugs should just be off the ballot. I mean, we're talking about character, we're talking about morality, we're talking about, you want to try to squeeze them in. I don't think you should be doing that. I mean, this is something that you're trying to
Mark,
put on somebody.
We've got it, Mark. Time's getting away from us, but we've got the point.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a lot of colleagues and a lot of peers who feel that same way, that they dismiss it.
But it has to be proven.
It has to be proven, and once it's proven, they still dismiss it. I mean, like Manny Ramirez, you asked about names on the ballot. Manny Ramirez is on the ballot here. Mm-hmm. He was suspended twice for positive drug tests. He will still get Hall of Fame votes. People, and one of my really close friends in baseball writing, who I think is one of the best in the business at what he does, voted for Manny Ramirez, and his explanation was, I'm not a morality police. I'm not gonna, work the beat that way. And different people have different views on it. I have to use a tool to get it from 14 to 12, 12 to 10, and this is the tool I have.
Yeah. We've got less than a minute. What are you thinking about the team of the Cardinals this year?
Less than a minute. Well, they've made some significant moves. Paul Goldschmidt is one of the 5 best hitters probably in the National League. They have him for 1 year. They added Andrew Miller, who for a long time has been the best lefty reliever, and he has redefined how that position is used. These are positive moves that have closed the gap on the Cubs and the Brewers. I think they have probably a roster that right now would contend for the division. What I find most interesting about them is how many eggs they've put in the 2019 basket. This is a team that has a lot of expiring contracts. If it doesn't work, they can move on, and that can lead to a lot of drama this season if it doesn't work.
Well, can't wait for it to start. It's not that far away. You're already talking spring training. That's just a couple of weeks away.
Yes, sir. I'm less than a month away from reporting there myself.
All righty. Well, have a great season, Derrick. Great to see you. And
thank you.
Thanks for being with us. Baseball writer for the Post-Dispatch, Derrick Goold.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.